Several months ago, I warned that the US was going to use a chemical weapons false flag attack as an excuse to launch intervention or attack against Syria. And it looks like that's exactly what's happening. Now, after the Bilderberg meeting has ended, after McCain, the demonic Zionist puppet, met with the treacherous dogs of the FSA in Turkey, Obama has suddenly decided that Syria has used chemical weapons against the insurgents. And how convenient this announcement now that the Geneva talks have broken down and the Syrian military is making advances in Homs, Aleppo, and Damascus. How transparent is it that suddenly now Obama has decided that Syria used chemical weapons, even though a few weeks ago what we were hearing out of the US government was they had absolutely no evidence that this happened. Never mind that there was a UN report by Del Ponte that said that the insurgents had used chemical weapons on civilians. Never mind that Turkish police seized 2 kilograms of sarin from the homes of al-Nusra al-Qaeda militants in the course of their investigation into the Reyhanli bombings. Never mind that Turkey is a country that has been supporting the insurrection and has no reason to make any of that up. And never mind that Iraq arrested terrorists with chemical weapons who were planning on going to Syria. None of that is newsworthy for the American people. The US has a red line, but not a red line if the insurgents or al-Qaeda use the chemical weapons that they probably gave them. Nor do they mind if they use that to taint soil samples, nor do they mind inventing evidence. And just like they invented evidence about WMDs in Iraq, and once again it was McCain that was pushing that very hard. It's so just like they invented evidence about WMDs in Iraq. And guess who it was that was pushing for war and the lies that time? Once again, it was McCain. It's hard to imagine that the same lies can be given by the same people and the world sits quietly and swallows it. Just like they invented evidence about WMDs in Iraq. And guess who it was that was pushing hard for the war and the lies then? McCain. The same lies by proven liars, and the world is ready to swallow. The accusations of sarin are coming from a French news team, Le Monde. Some of the footage they took in which they claim sarin was used. This insurgent seems to have time to cough before putting on his mask. If this was sarin, even the mask wouldn't be enough to save him, because sarin is absorbed through the skin, and he would be convulsing on the ground within seconds, as would everybody around him. But now they expect us to believe that tear gas is a weapon of mass destruction. Wasn't the whole premise behind WMDs being a red line the massive devastation and civilian deaths that they would cause? Where are the thousands dead? Instead, we get footage of piff-paff and bogus soil samples. If no weapon of devastation was used, what is the excuse to send bigger weapons and keep this war going and cause the deaths of thousands? And since when is the US government world police who can dictate to the world who can use what, when it was them that used chemical weapons in Iraq? They were the ones that burned the flesh of human beings with white phosphorus and poisoned the soil with depleted uranium. They were the ones that devastated Al-Anbar and killed thousands in Fallujah. These people don't just kill thousands, they poison generations. Birth defects, horrific birth defects, is what they left behind. And where is justice? It's hard to believe that history can repeat itself so quickly, that people who should really know better and should have learned from history do not, that there are traitors calling themselves Syrian who want to see a repeat of what happened in Iraq in Syria, who betray their nation not only to the enemies of Syria, but the enemies of the world.
We're going to cross over to Toronto now. Joining us via Skype is Ken Stone with the Hamilton Coalition to Stop the War. Many thanks for joining us here on Press TV, Mr. Stone. Now, it is interesting to note that despite the clear and concrete indications that it was the foreign-backed insurgents that used the chemical weapons against the Syrian population, we only hear the Western countries and their allies within the region speaking of a red line when Assad government uses chemical weapons. Why aren't these red lines being drawn for the insurgents?
Well, it's all reminiscent of the run-up to the war in Iraq, where the weapons of mass destruction argument was used, which turned out to be a complete fabrication. And the same script's being used in Syria. So the USA and its Western allies are desperate to find a pretext for which to intervene militarily on the side of the mercenaries, the Al-Qaeda mercenaries, that they are sponsoring in Syria. So they have concocted a red line, and they are intending to use this as an excuse to help their Syrian proxies try and overthrow the government. And those proxies desperately need help because they're losing the war against the Syrian government, and they're only pushing more and more of the Syrian population into supporting the camp of President Bashar al-Assad with their terrorist attacks on the population and with their assassination of civilians and with their murders of Syrian prisoners of war. So it's a buildup in the West to justify, quote, humanitarian military intervention, which the people here do not want. They are opposed to the war. The people I'm associated with believe that there is more ways than war to solve international disputes. There is negotiation and diplomacy. And as I recall, last June, the United Nations agreed on a memorandum about the solution or a way to proceed in Syria, and Mr. Lakhdar Brahimi is supposed to be bringing it about. And in fact, there's a meeting right now going on in Syria, a Musalaha conference, National Reconciliation Conference, which is led by religious authorities. That's, in the opinion of the people I deal with every day in the anti-war movement, that's the way to go. A made in Syria political solution to the crisis.
Indeed. Now, Mr. Stone, a former Bush official has gone so far as to say that the use of chemical weapons in Syria was actually a false flag Israeli operation. What do you say to that?
I'm inclined to agree with him. I recall watching on Press TV some of the YouTube videos that these Al-Qaeda mercenaries, which are paid for and sponsored by the West and the certain Gulf countries, I saw a number of them, and in one of them, they were showing off how they were preparing chemical attacks, and they were using unfortunate rabbits as specimens. And so it's no stretch at all to think, as the Bush administration, the former Bush administration official said, that the so-called sarin chemical attacks that were recently recorded are false flag operations undertaken by the Al-Qaeda mercenaries, sponsored by the West, in order to blame the chemical attack on the Syrian government and therefore create a pretext for a Western military intervention. It's despicable, it's illegal, it's a flagrant violation of the national sovereignty of Syria, and the peace-loving people of the world, all over the world, should be demanding their governments take action and stop this mercenary war.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. That was Ken Stone with the Hamilton Coalition to Stop the War, joining us via Skype from Toronto. Mr. Stone, thank you very much for your comments here on Press TV.
Hi everyone, Syrian girl here. In the last few days, a photo emerged of the insurgents unpacking boxes of gas masks. And if you notice, some of the gas masks are in the US style M42A1 and not in the Russian style, which means that they could have only come from outside of Syria. This adds credence to the potential chemical weapons false flag event that many bloggers have been writing about. That is, that NATO plans to use chemical weapons in Syria via the insurgents and accuse the Syrian military of doing this in order to create some sort of casus belli for foreign intervention. Some time ago, the Blogspot land destroyer actually posted images of the insurgents donning the gas masks, and even RT reported about the potential for a chemical weapons false flag operation. In the last month, there has been a lot of news and accusation coming out of the mainstream media, claiming that Syria might use chemical weapons against its own people in a bid for the government to stay in power. In fact, just a few hours ago, at the UN General Assembly, the Israeli ambassador to the UN, Ron Prosser, demanded that the Syrian government lock down its chemical weapons and said, quote, "We should not pretend that a regime that cuts the throats of children today will not be prepared to gas them tomorrow." Again, he alludes to the notion that the Syrian government might use chemical weapons on its own people, clearly a sign that they are planning some sort of a false flag event. This is in order to create a casus belli of attack against Syria by NATO powers, in the same way that the WMDs were used in Iraq. There's also been some claims that NATO and Israel are afraid of the chemical weapons getting into the wrong hands and hence must act in order to stop this from happening. Again, an excuse for intervention. This is also to cover up for the fact that they have given the insurgents chemical weapons in order to carry out this false flag event. The irony is, it was in fact an Israeli newspaper that reported that the Syrian insurgents were given chemical weapons by Libya only a month ago. And the mainstream media seems not too shy at all to discuss the fact that Libya is arming the Syrian insurgents, as well as being proud of bombings that the Syrian insurgents are conducting. The accusations forced the spokesman for the Syrian Foreign Ministry to come out and make a statement against them. While he didn't confirm or deny the existence of Syria's chemical weapons, because that's Syria's policy, he said if Syria did have them, they would never be used against the Syrian population and only as a deterrent for foreign attack, which is completely within Syria's rights, especially since Israel, who is just across the border, has its own nuclear weapons stockpile. We all remember the lies that were sold about Iraq's WMDs, which were never found, even though Bush looked under a table for them, in order to send US troops to Iraq to kill over 1 million Iraqis. And in fact, the same narrative was used against Libya more recently. In reality, NATO powers gave chemical weapons to the Libyan insurgents of the Zintan tribe, which were then subsequently used against the pro-Gaddafi Mashashia tribe. I truly hope that making this information available will actually prevent the false flag from happening, as I do believe that we're coming closer and closer to seeing this event actually unfold. Thank you very much.